Never in my wildest dreams. But I would tell you that I had a very meager upbringing. My dad was a self-employed plumbing and heating contractor. What he taught me was work ethic and honesty. I would say this, first of all, NASA employees are naturally driven and they stay around a long time. That's good and that's bad. Our average age here at Johnson Space Center is around 48 or 49 years old. So we really need an infusion of younger folks, and we're working really hard on that.
Hello, everyone, and happy to welcome you today to our next episode, as today we're diving into the world of knowledge sharing practices, a vital set of elements to NASA's continued success. And joining us today is Jim Rostohar, Chief Knowledge Officer for NASA's Johnson Space Center. Jim is responsible for designing enterprise architecture, conducting research, leading implementation planning, and providing consultation and oversight for the center's knowledge management activities. He conducts knowledge management campaigns, workshops, and benchmarking, as well as agency and industry collaboration efforts. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Nadia. Very nice to be with you today.
Thank you so much. We have prepared for today a set of questions. I hope it's okay to walk through and gain a little bit more of an understanding of how you guys are seeing knowledge sharing at NASA and the innovation element of it alongside. Hence why our first question is, Jim, we have a traditional discovery question for our guests. Please kindly tell us a little bit about yourself in 3 words you feel would best describe you.
3 words. Okay. I would say a listener.
Thank you. Yep.
A communicator, and a leader.
Excellent choices, Jim. I could see a myriad of the awards that you've gained in the industry as a communicator yourself. So you've started your pathway working within Navy. Could you please talk a little bit about the title that you currently hold as Chief Knowledge Officer? What does it mean to be the Chief Knowledge Officer at NASA, a keeper of NASA's know-how?
Sure. I think I probably should start a little bit with a little bit of history of
Please.
how this came about at NASA. And It was really in the early 2000s that something called the NASA Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, or ASAP, of course we have to have an acronym for everything, they had a finding. They came to NASA, and they're an oversight group, an advisory group, but they also asked NASA to take certain actions. And so they came and they said, you know, knowledge management and transfer within NASA has some aspects of storytelling around the campfire instead of modern digitally accessible and retrievable information sharing. So they were not real happy with what they saw in the way that we were sharing our knowledge. They also said the ASAP strongly recommends a continuous and formal effort in knowledge capture and lessons learned. Modern tools exist to facilitate this, and NASA should avail itself of them. So NASA then developed a knowledge policy for programs and projects, which requires each of the 10 NASA centers to appoint a CKO, or a Chief Knowledge Officer, of which I am one. And they asked us to facilitate center capture of sharing of stories, case studies, lessons learned, anything that will help people understand the past. Develop center knowledge strategy, be responsible for overseeing the planning and execution of center management activities, build and develop and support the center culture to enhance knowledge management efforts, and do that in a federated approach. And what is meant by a federated approach just means that each of the 10 centers have a portfolio which they're responsible for, but you have the freedom to specialize in one area as well. And so one center may be an expert in case studies, another in lessons learned. Here at Johnson Space Center, we specialize in data science. So we're very big in search and crunching and making things flow together.
The reason why I said excellent, Jim, is because I'm part of the tech industry, per se, in the UK. I've been working in the tech industry for quite a while, hence why when you mentioned data science, I tend to think that nothing is necessarily happening without a reason, because data is at the core of everything we do in tech. Hence why AI-driven solutions, decision modeling, all of that is part of what we currently do. Hence why thank you so much for sharing how it all came about within your role and how you've been given the task to organize these core elements of storytelling within NASA and make them or give them the vibe to inspire the rest who are currently wanting to know what's happening behind the scenes a bit more. So with that in mind, very curious to find out. So we've discussed a little bit about, the mission that was shared with you and how you've taken it on. And then from your perspective, very keen to understand about the set of skills that you have proliferated and found out as your winning skills, your end. Hence why the next question, I will just make it visible on the screen. What set of skills would you count as your winning skills to have helped you get this role?
Well, I would say, well, first of all, my background is in communications, as you mentioned. And so whether you're a reporter or in any kind of public relations type of role, listening is very important. So you have to be a good listener to be able to gather those things, to write a story or to tell or to share a message. You have to be a good listener. And then coupled with that, writing. If you are not a good writer, go get those skills, because it really surrounds everything that we do. You have to be able to write to be able to tell the story. And I'll transfer that to storytelling. Storytelling is the best way to get people interested and understand their return on investment and understand why it's important. And then, of course, kind of down on the rung, but it naturally goes with public speaking. Yeah, you will eventually become a public speaker, whether you like it or not. I'm not really a fan of it, but I have to do it. So I had to take that on and learn a little bit better how to, come across in public.
Totally, that makes sense. And the link between the public speaking, the storytelling, and the core mission that you guys are working on makes total sense to help exhibit this and the role of this to the wider population. In terms of the skills that you have focused your attention on, and if we were to discuss a little bit more about the new skills that you would focus on your attention later on in gaining for developing in this role, what do you think this might be?
Well, I think some of the skills for later would be, make sure that you define your objectives and, use the tools that are available. Also, apply some of the data reduction methods. What I mean by that is feel free to edit ruthlessly. I think that a lot of people just don't break things down. Visualize and summarize. This goes back to what you were talking about with data science. It's so important for people to see things in a different way. Sometimes it just turns on the light, and people then can understand it better.
And why do you think, and that's part of the next question because it ties in quite nicely together, why do you think the knowledge or the concept of knowledge is so crucial within NASA, but not only, I suppose, within NASA? We're all looking up at NASA as the key center for innovation and development out there. But in terms of how you're seeing it yourself?
Well, if you kind of study knowledge, one of the key things that you find out is there are at least two kinds, maybe three, some say, but the two that we kind of concentrate are explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge are those things that are written down, things like rules and directives and things that you find in a book. Tacit knowledge is those things that we are all taught, or ways to do things, and they typically reside in our head. And as you can imagine, NASA has over 60 years of data or knowledge in hardware, software processes, but it's the tacit knowledge that walks out the door when someone retires. So we're working really hard to capture some of those through some different techniques. But a large part of our workforce is retirement eligible. And we refer to this kind of jokingly as the Silver Tsunami, because all of that knowledge is going to walk out the door very quickly. And if we don't capture it, we're going to regret that.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Jim. Reason why I'm quite thrilled by your answer and reference to Silver Tsunami is because we've got another question later on that underpins this and develops this a little bit more in detail in terms of how do you actually capture this knowledge and make sure that you share it amongst the new employees as much as retain with the existing ones and further develop that one. Now that we're discussing this as a concept, but also as a set of practices that you've mentioned, how would you see this is part of the next question, and that is, what are the key knowledge assets at NASA and why do you think they're key, such as people, processes, intellectual capital, and what is the most important part of your role mission? And we've discussed a little bit about your role mission, but still key to unfold it a bit more, please.
Sure. Well, in knowledge management, there are several different steps or pieces to it. The first one is collection. And so it's one of those things where we know across our center and across our agency, there are tons of pieces of knowledge that sometimes people want to keep very close to their vest because either they invented it or they don't want to share their mistakes. And quite honestly, the mistakes are the most valuable things that we have because it keeps us from doing that again. So we collect it. We have to make sure also that it's in a usable format. And, we typically will take anything in any format and then we'll convert it if we need to. But if we start in a recognizable format, then it saves everybody some time. The other thing, probably the biggest thing, you can have all this, you can have collected it, you can get it in the right format, but searchability is probably the most important thing. And we will probably get to that, but we use a tool that helps us search through lots of formats, lots of processes. And it's one thing to have all this great information, but if you can't find anything, you're stuck, right? So the other thing is we have to continually communicate the importance to get buy-in and show return on our investment to our senior leaders.
Thank you. You've alluded to a very interesting point you're making in terms of searchability. I'm a big fan of that as a behavior in order to be able to find very quickly what you need. And so it saves you time. So with that in mind, we're paving our way towards the next question, which is your AI-powered search tool, the Goldfire search, seems to be your internal Magna Carta for complex data mining. How important is it to train the behaviors and soft skills at NASA? And why is it such an important piece of processes around?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to tell you a little story, but before I get to that, I think if we teach people how to use some of these tools, they become force multipliers. It saves time, it saves money. And if we can, we try to become evangelists for knowledge, if you will. And the way that we do that is if we find a problem and help someone solve it, now we got them for life because they see the value. So Goldfire is a commercial off-the-shelf tool. We have no, we use it like anybody can use it. We have no relationship with them other than we are a consumer. And this is something that we got into, I don't know, about 10 years ago. And the Orion program, who was trying to put together, there's something called, if you remember back to Apollo, or if you've seen the Apollo capsule, when they land, they have what they call crew uprighting module system. And it's basically airbags to turn the capsule upright when it's in the water so we can extract the astronauts. Well, the Orion program, although it's going to be a bigger capsule and have different systems, it's going to use something very similar in that it needs to be able to upright the capsule. So one of the engineers for Orion was kind of searching around to try to find the information from Apollo that has to do with the process and some of the technical things. And he really couldn't find what he needed to solve his knowledge gap. So he even went so far as to go calling up old retired guys and gals, and they'd go in their attic and dust off, the schematic, and that was somewhat helpful. But he really couldn't find what he needed. So we brought him to our office, sat him down with Goldfire, our KM search tool. And, within 2 hours, he found multiple hits, if you will, for what he needed. And within the first 10, he found the answers that he needed to solve this problem and close his knowledge gap. And so I wrote a white paper on it. I said, well, let me ask you, if you didn't have this tool, what would it have done? He says, well, we would have had to go back to the drawing board and develop a test model. And that would have cost, $2 or $3 million. And it would have taken a year or two to do. So that day, Goldfire paid for itself. And we have been using it ever since.
The power of knowledge sharing is absolutely humongous, and your example proves this. And also not just in terms of the speed of finding the information, but also in terms of investment, the savings that you guys have made or still are making along the way for many. Might I ask, is this a public information that is available, or this is an internal tool?
No, it's commercial off the shelf. Anybody can buy it. You have to pay a licensing fee, but anybody can do it. Yeah, many companies use it. There are others as well. I don't want to sound too proprietary, but it just happens to be the one that we use.
Sure. But the fact that it's public, of course, it's on demand, but it's publicly available. That's priceless. Thank you so much for sharing this, Jim. And as part of this, very keen to understand. So we have discussed about the journey, how it has come about as part of your mission within NASA. Also, how you're training, how you're making up the processes, just so it's becoming very, very lucrative for all the parties involved, and at the same time productive, as we were talking about the savings and the speed of finding things. With that in mind, can we go back a little bit and discuss about your childhood and what type of skills were you developing back then? Did you ever think that you might be one day work at NASA?
Never in my wildest dreams. But I would tell you that I had a very meager upbringing. My dad was a self-employed plumbing and heating contractor, and I worked with him he had some medical problems early on, had a heart attack when he was 40. So he needed help. So every school vacation, every Christmas vacation, I would be in the truck with him and work with him. What he taught me was work ethic and honesty. Probably the most honest person I know. And I probably could never live up to what he taught me. But did I ever dream of working at NASA? No, I joined the Navy because, honestly, as I said, meager upbringing, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. And so the way that I got to college is through the United States Navy. They paid for my college, and then I got to NASA and they paid for another degree for me. But I later built on those leadership roles that you learn in the Navy early. When you're very young in the Navy, you're given responsibility and leadership that most other organizations don't. For example, if you're on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, and you, as a 17 or 18-year-old kid, see something wrong with that aircraft, you can tell them stop, and no one's going to yell at you. They're going to be very happy that you took the time to save somebody's life. So that's the kind of burdenful leadership that you get at a very young age, and you learn from it. So I later built on that, and apparently NASA saw something in those, and so I continue that here. And my goals are always to do the best that I can do, no matter what I'm doing. Ask a lot of questions and keep my head out of the sand. The main thing too is learn the history of your organization. So these days, I've gotten all the medals and rewards I need. Now I take great pleasure in making sure that my people get recognized and rewarded. That's what really gets me excited.
And that's what makes a great leader, from what I'm seeing as part of the corporate environment, but also the public organizations environment that's completely everywhere in demand. And you were talking about the responsibility and accountability from as part of the skills that you were building up from the earlier ages. And that paves out nicely the way to our next question, because I'm very keen to understand a little bit more about how to prepare the younger generations. I know that you're a fortunate daddy of 3 girls, and that's something that again I've learned from your document. 3 daughters: Audrey, Krista, and Sierra. And very keen to find out, how have you trained them for today's environment? So what did you think were some of the key skills that you could pass on and also develop as new ones within them?
Well, I think that the thing that I've learned with three girls in the house at the same time is there's not enough bathrooms, for one thing. But two, is that they were growing up at the time where this boom of technology was taking over. And, I would tell them about what a record player was or an 8-track, and they look at me like I was crazy because they have phones and they have everything at the palm of their hand. And I tell them, you realize that in the palm of your hand, you hold more technology than what flew on the space shuttle or on Apollo. It's just so much different. And so I think, technology is going to push us to be more agile, and innovation will develop ways for us to interface quickly via AI and other tools. The challenge even today is with my daughters or anyone is to find ways to interconnect what we know in the analog world with the speed and the depth and the volume that AI brings. So kind of like what I was alluding to before, you really need to define your objectives and scope, and don't let things get too big. This is what I tell my kids is take bite-sized chunks and you're going to do better. Seek feedback and collaboration. The more you hear, the more you know, and the more tools you have in your tool bag. And understand the importance of what you're looking at. Take the time to understand it. And if you don't, go off and do some research and read more about it or dig into it so that you don't just say, oh, that's what that is and move on. Why is it the way it is? That's kind of what I teach my kids.
But at the same time, when it comes to the transferable skill set and what you're seeing as some of the foundation for the future, because where I'm finding myself as a parent a little bit more constrained, let's say, is by this overwhelm of knowing that AI has come around and it has learned about humanity and how we've evolved in a matter of just a few years. And the speed that it's developing in terms of its learning, it's almost instant. So I know that obviously there are humans who are training it, let's call it that, who are infusing this programming at the back end so that it works and it has this capacity to discern the right from the wrong, let's say. In time, this would be even furthermore the case. But in terms of its ability to adapt soft skills such as integrity and honesty that you were talking about, I suppose that's a little bit more of a gray area, at least for me, to understand at the moment how that all work. What do you think from your perspective, us as humans, to be able to correlate and live harmoniously alongside AI? What type of transferable skills should we be looking at developing in future?
Well, I think we're fortunate within NASA that most of our systems are pretty safe and we're pretty protected. One of the things, though, that and I'll get more into that, but one of the things that we have to continually break down is our information silos. We have silos here where people hold their data and so on, like I mentioned. But those are key for if only a few people have access to that information, that can be dangerous. We need to be able to share it and make it widely accessible within NASA. But you talk about AI and there are all these phishing schemes and things like that you have to constantly battle. It seems like daily. And NASA does a pretty good job using AI to weed out the bad guys, but in our personal lives, that's not the case. So I always say, don't accept any single source. Always get a second opinion. Maybe that goes back to my journalism days, but it's important in the digital world as well. And the other thing, and this is something probably your parents said to you, I know mine said to me, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
Yes, indeed. It's definitely the type of an approach that most parents are interested in passing on to their children, I suppose, right? So it's the case of how do you discern the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, and take it from there. And I suppose it's very interesting how it's coming up quite nicely into the next question. You've once said that I think when social media elements are blended with knowledge management, everyone wins. Now, that's what I'd be very keen to understand from within. How do you help educate NASA's employees on how to discern this accurate news from the fake news and how to use AI to avoid making faulty decisions? It's all about decisions ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, like I said, we're very fortunate within NASA to be able to have a kind of a closed loop system. However, as you know, we are working with lots of partners and a lot of other spacefaring companies. And so we have to kind of educate them sometimes on the way that we see things and do things so that we're all on the same page. That doesn't mean that we're going to try to constrain them. Obviously, we can't do that. They're private companies. But we need to have the same set of, let's say, values or keys to the coffee mess. We have to be aligned to protect all of us. And so that's one of the key things, I think, is be aligned, make sure that we're all dealing with the same kinds of security parameters, and make sure that we keep each other safe. And if we see something that doesn't look right, it probably isn't.
Thank you, Jim. In fact, you've mentioned the element of culture. I'd be very keen to find out how would you describe the culture is like at NASA, simply because the reason I'm interested in this, I've had a chance to discuss about the culture of Netflix with the first CEO of Netflix and the founder of Netflix, Mark Randolph, who was talking to me about, yes, he did share actually about the culture of Netflix, which is famous across the board. We all know how they approach the error making, for instance, as an action, and how they actually feel, as much as you've mentioned yourself earlier, that this is very important. It's almost priceless, capturing the error making so that you don't fall over this again and learn from this as much as possible. Hence, with you guys, how do you would you describe the culture at NASA? What do you guys reward as a behavior, and what do you don't as a faulty behavior?
Well, I would say this. First of all, NASA employees are naturally driven, and they stay around a long time. That's good and that's bad. Our average age here at Johnson Space Center is around 48 or 49 years old. So we really need an infusion of younger folks, and we're working really hard on that. But they stay around, and they are brilliant people. But NASA's always pushed the envelope safely. We use something called problematic risk assessment to determine the likelihood of an error or an issue occurring, or a risk occurring, I should say. Safety is paramount to everything we do. And as a government agency, not only do we have to be safe, we have to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So we incentivize innovation as well as cost savings. And our culture has been that way for so long. We teach folks that it's okay to share your mistake. As a matter of fact, we have a little booklet that we put out called My Best Mistakes. And that's where people put together their they had the intestinal fortitude to share their worst mistake, and we cleaned them up and put them in a little book, and we share that because we want to show the culture to the employees that it's okay to make a mistake as long as we learn from it. Now, obviously, there's big mistakes we don't want to make, but if we make a mistake and we can honestly improve something from what we learned, then that's fantastic.
Fabulous, Jim. And I love the practice that you mentioned about the booklet and the my favorite mistake. It's amazing. I wonder if there are certain again, to foster the innovation skills within NASA and the development of this. Given that you've said yourself, the average lifetime of an employee within NASA is quite long. It's about 45 years. Also, is the fact that you're fostering this element of them being driven. What do you think? Which practices do you think help keep them motivated, other than the fact that, of course, they work for NASA?
Well, there's a lot of things that we do internally. We have mandatory training, but that's not where the the nuggets are. We do informal informational talks, lectures, sharing, informal what we call brown bag lunch lectures. We'll come to a conference room, and I've done some of these myself, talking about knowledge management. and in an informal atmosphere, just kind of lay it out there on the table and let people ask whatever. The other thing is we work really hard to get employees to lower their shields and share their mistakes. And this, my best mistake booklet is part of it, but you can do that so much easier in an informal environment than somebody standing up there giving a speech. But if you have an interactive type of environment, things come out and things are shared and people feel a part of the conversation. And that's the huge thing. You know, we also share stuff through our website. We have an internal website. We also do something called pause and learn events. That's where at the beginning, now there's no prescription to this, but what we suggest from the knowledge management standpoint is it would be nice to do one in the beginning, maybe a third of the way, three-quarters of the way, and then at the end, or you could do it in quarters, whatever. But the idea is stop after about, you're into this project, stop and let's pause and see what we've learned. Are there adjustments that we could make? Is there something that somebody else knows that they can bring to the conversation? So these are called pause and learn events. And then at the end, you do a big wrap-up one. But what we find is many issues, problems are found in the middle. Don't wait till the end, because half the time you can't remember it all. So if you can stop in the increments along the way, it's amazing how well that works. And then we also have what we call expert finders or knowledge networks. These are communities of practice, so that if somebody doesn't know the answer at this center, they can call up somebody, one of their counterparts at another center, or even within the center to support or to back up, or, hey, would you mind taking a look at this? Because it doesn't look right to me. Is there something that you can add to this? So those are some of the kind of ways. And a lot of the, like I say, I feel the informal communication is even more powerful.
I'm so grateful that you've shared these practices, Jim. Also coming from the corporate environment, where I know that we're flooded with information day in and day out, and we receive all sorts of data from, as you were saying yourself earlier, either from within or from third parties. And, you know, it's a case of making the time for that, but also making the time for your day-to-day. So how do you navigate that? And you've rightly mentioned that taking the time to pause and learn is probably priceless, then going into a bit more of a step-by-step approach to navigate through it and discern this information to see what is really needed and what is less relevant. And that's probably a very interesting practice that anyone can adopt in the corporate environment. With that in mind, I know that Amazon, for instance, they're famous for their no slides approach to their informal meetings and for finding out some solutions for their decision making. What would you feel your end? Do you have a similar approach, or how would you advise the corporate environment when it comes to being overflooded with slides?
Yeah, well, you know, we have like mandatory training. I think I mentioned each employee has to do a certain thing every year, and it's a lot of it's safety, and you know, it's the latest information on whatever it may be. So that's great. But we also really encourage a culture of continual improvement. So, and all of the things that we talked about before have a role in that. They play into that. You know, it's a real learning culture with case studies and lessons learned, but you have to be agile and evolve your learning to consider what's important at the time, because that changes, right? So we do a lot of what we call, face-to-face learning, I guess I'd call it. And this is the type of learning that is through social exchanges and activities that bring people together to share their knowledge, you know, storytelling, forums, workshops, things like that. And what we found during the dreaded pandemic is we learned that the reach of these activities can be multiplied through online tools such as videos and virtual dialogues as well. So I still think there's no, and I may be the only one in the world, but I still think there's no substitute for having people in the room, being eye to eye, being able to talk to each other. Great. Some people through this pandemic and this online work now have taken this, in my opinion, just the pendulum has swung a little bit too far.
I can see where you're coming from, Jim. There is an element of that, I suppose, in any corporate environment at the moment also, because we are seeing the impact of this continuous post-pandemic world with, hybrid versus day-to-day in the office. And we are seeing the fact that whenever there's a chance to get together and see people face-to-face, that's actually priceless. It's uncomparable to what you can do virtually and online. That's definitely the case. So
it's also because I'm kind of a people person, and I have a sense of humor, and jokes just don't land over the internet.
I do agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. You have to see people to make crucial decisions. That's for sure. And with that in mind, I'm very keen to find out when you were saying about the learning environment, and we're again going through the pathway of seeing what the next question might look like. But it's in line with what you were alluding to, being the processes of learning, of uncovering some of the key behaviors within NASA. And my question then in line is, in your role as a quality management system representative, how do you ensure the maintenance of high quality standards when it comes to the expertise shown and shared by employees?
Well, this is very interesting because when I first took, again, I told you I had a communications background, and I was asked, we have a CKO or a chief knowledge officer that's retiring. Would you come and do that? Would you be interested in do that? And I said, well, I don't know. I have to learn about it. So I did, and I was very excited about it. And I got here, and they said, oh, you're also going to have audits and corrective actions. And I said, oh, good. So I had to do a lot of learning myself. There's international quality certifications and standards called ISO 9001 and AS 9100 for aerospace and spacecraft. So I had to learn all of those things. Thank goodness I have an audit manager who's been here for many years who helped me a lot to understand these things. But audits and corrective actions really are here to maintain quality and reliability in what we do, the things we build, and the processes that we have. It's really about the quality process. As I said before, safety is very important to us. So when we look at these things, when we audit both internal, or sometimes we have a third-party auditor that comes external to look at what we do, really, to break it down, what we're doing is we are looking at if we're doing what we say we're going to do. We write all of these directives, and it says we're going to do A, B, C, and D. And so when we audit, we say, are you doing A, B, C, and D, or just A and B? And so that's how we kind of self police ourselves, if that's probably not the word, but you know what I mean. We are making sure that we're staying on track.
That definitely sounds like it. And the fact that you're saying yourself, you have a very clear set of either the requirements or expectations, just so on the flip side, when the time comes for you to evaluate that, you actually have them clearly laid out for anyone to check if these are actually being put in place or not. And that, I think, is very important because it not only disciplines the team, but also it allows them to see what is the actual expectation laid out there and how far do they need to go to be able to achieve that. So that's definitely a priceless procedure.
I would just add one more thing to that, is that so when you go back and you say, okay, well, this A, B, C, D, okay, D really doesn't apply anymore. Well, okay, change it. But now you know, so now you can go back and change it, and you can update it so that you are actually doing what you say you're going to do.
Absolutely. And that being in line with the actual real life environment to make sure if you're flexible to that or you're accounting for that and you're able to navigate through it a lot more with ease. Thank you so much for this clarification, Jim. As part of this, what do you think that when looking around, obviously we've discussed about the mission of your role. We discussed about how you're navigating through it with your team and what makes it easier with the use of processes and tools, just like the 𝘠𝘪𝘮 search tool that you currently are using and making a fabulous use of it, also from the speed, but also the investment point of view. So looking forward, what excites you the most about the future of knowledge management in the space exploration, please?
Well, what excites me is that I think we've already seen that knowledge management has paid big dividends. And one of the examples I gave you is just one, and there have been many others. So what excites me is to be able to use some of the tools that are in development now and will be coming to make people's search for information easier, quicker, and more reliable. And that's really the key. Is it's got to be reliable. You can find something quick, but if it's not what you're looking for, it's no good. So you need to make sure that it is reliable and that it's actionable.
And then the next side of question, because I had to look into the both, is this: on the flip side, is there anything that worries you about the future?
Well, I think in terms of technology, it's a struggle to keep up. It's moving so fast that it's difficult. And sometimes, my gosh, even if you go to look at your consumer electronics, by the time you have this one, the next one's already out, whatever it is. And so I worry about that. I worry that we don't develop some of our tools to the point that they're completely useful before we move on to the next one. So I think that's something we all must be very attuned to, is making sure that we get quality and not quantity.
Excellent point of view. Thank you so much, Jim. If we were to unfold this question and look into the human intelligence element as part of the interactions to or with AI, how would you say we as humans need to develop ourselves so that we're better at keeping up with technology and where it's going?
Well, I do think that we need to pay attention, and unfortunately, there's a lot of folks, and I work with some of them as well, that don't pay attention to all the latest things. I think a lot of our young folks are way ahead of us, older folks, in tuning in and being on the cutting edge. So I think all of us need to probably notch up our level of understanding of not just what we have today, but where it's headed. And then we might be able to somewhere get even. I don't know that we'll ever get ahead, but if we can stay even, then I would call that a win.
If that's okay, I'll ask you one definitive question before we find out if there's anything else that you feel that we might be asking as part of the overall discussion. But my question was, with a view into the future and where the technology is going, if you were to gain a superpower yourself, what would that be?
Wow, gosh. Well, the ability to foresee the future today, because then I could plan, then I could organize, then I could construct those things that would help me for the future. But with anything, what I would say is start small and build on it. And that's what we've done even with our KM program. We kind of are grassroots and you know, look outside of your own industry. We've done things like we go to KM conferences that are, you know, APQC and KM World here and others. But what we found is, okay, we see the same people, they say the same things. So last year, a colleague and I went to a building industry KM conference, and we learned all kinds of things, little nuggets here and there. So don't be locked into your industry. Don't stay within your industry. Look outside, because you'll see examples that you can take home and put to use.
They call it, and thank you so much for this, Jim, they call it cognitive creativity, whereby you're able to connect all of these dots together and being able to look a little bit outside of the box to then see maybe there's something out there that might inspire you back. And that's absolutely the case. I resonate with that massively. And probably that's one of the reasons why I've launched the podcast as well, to be able to look a little bit outside of the box, see what's out there, what might inspire not only me in my personal and professional journey, but also see what might inspire the younger generations of those who might try and look out for the tech industry.
Yeah, I would add one thing is, you asked me about the future of knowledge management. And I think that AI is going to be a big player in that, for sure. It already is. Matter of fact, our Goldfire tool uses AI. But I think it's really going to be real-time collection and search bonus. And you can see, kind of like what we were talking about, you can see evidence of this if you look at telemedicine or the ISS. The folks on the ISS, they get professional consultancy, from Earth, management, maintenance, and manufacturing and the service industry. They're all starting to get into AI to the point that we won't know what it was like before.
And it's probably one of the reasons why it's really important to capture that knowledge that you were alluding to at the beginning of our conversation, in terms of everything that was out there before is also priceless, so that you can move into the future. You need to know the past quite nicely. So otherwise, it would be the bucket information that even AI would probably not have access to if we wouldn't capture it beforehand. Jim, thank you so much for this. It was an absolutely brilliant conversation. I'm very grateful for your time and for the insights you've shared. And if you believe there is something that you wish I could have asked and I didn't have a chance yet, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm leaving the ground as well to anyone else who might be watching the episode after that to ask the question. I'll gratefully pass them on to you as well.
Okay. I will leave you with some of your younger folks a few things to think about, if that's okay.
Please. Absolutely.
Here's just a few things that I kind of jotted down that I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget. And that is, ask questions, force discussions, challenge everything, be transparent about your decisions, and include everyone, because the more the merrier, and the more you have, the better the outcome.
Thank you so much for this, Jim. Can't thank you enough for your time and for the insights shared. And if that's okay, as I shared earlier, I'd be very grateful to pass on any other questions that there might be after this, so that we can open the ground. As you said, include everyone with their thirst for knowledge. Thank you, Jim, for this.
Thank you so much.